Clara Whitmore's hands were shaking so hard she could barely grip the shovel. The frozen ground fought back with every strike, but she kept digging. Her brother's body lay wrapped in canvas behind her, stiff and cold. Not one person from Silver Creek had come. Not one. The minister said he was busy. The undertaker wanted payment first. So here she was, a widow from Boston, alone, in a Montana blizzard, burying the only family she had left. If you want to see how Clara survives this town that wants her gone, subscribe to our channel and watch until the end. Drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story travels. The shovel cracked against frozen earth again. Clara's arms burned. Her fingers had gone numb an hour ago, but she couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. You're gonna kill yourself out here. Clara spun around, shovel raised like a weapon. A tall figure stood at the edge of the small cemetery, snow collecting on the brim of his hat. Stay back, she warned. The man held up both hands, palms out. Easy now. I ain't here to cause trouble. Then why are you here? Clara's voice cracked. The whole town made it clear they want nothing to do with my brother's burial. The stranger stepped forward slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. In the gray winter light, Clara could see his face, now weathered, maybe late 30s, with eyes the color of river stones. He looked at the shallow grave, then at the canvas-wrapped body, then back at her. I'm Nathaniel Callahan. Folks call me Nate. He removed his hat briefly. Your brother was William Whitmore. You knew him. He was my neighbor. Good man. Nate's jaw tightened. Didn't deserve what happened to him. Clara felt something crack inside her chest. In 3 days since arriving in Silver Creek, those were the first kind words anyone had spoken about William. What do you mean, what happened to him? She lowered the shovel slightly. The sheriff said it was a mining accident. Nate didn't answer right away. He looked around the empty cemetery, then back toward town, where smoke rose from chimneys in the distance. We shouldn't talk here. He gestured toward the grave. Let me help you finish this first. I don't need... Ma'am. His voice was gentle but firm. You're about to collapse. Your lips are blue. You ain't eaten today, have you? Clara wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her. Her knees buckled slightly, and Nate moved fast, catching her elbow before she fell. Stubborn, he muttered. Just like William said you'd be. He talked about me. All the time. Nate steadied her, then reached for the shovel. Said his little sister was the bravest woman he knew. Said you nursed soldiers during the fever outbreak in Boston when everyone else ran. Clara's eyes stung, but she refused to cry. Not here, not in front of a stranger. Let me do this, Nate said quietly. Please, I owe him that much. She wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed at her to trust no one in this godforsaken town. But exhaustion won. She stepped back and watched as Nate Callahan dug her brother's grave with steady, powerful strokes. Neither spoke for a long while. The only sounds were the shovel breaking earth and the wind howling through the bare trees. Why didn't you come to the funeral service? Clara finally asked. You said he was your neighbor. Nate paused, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold. I was in Helena when it happened, selling cattle. Didn't hear about William until I got back yesterday. He resumed digging. If I'd been here... He didn't finish the sentence. If you'd been here, what... Nate stopped again. This time he looked directly at her, and Clara saw something dangerous in those riverstone eyes. Something that looked like barely contained rage. If I'd been here, your brother might still be alive. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. What are you saying? Not here. Nate glanced toward the tree line. You never know who's listening in this town. He finished digging in silence. Together they lowered William's body into the ground. Clara tried to say a prayer, but the words caught in her throat. All she could manage was a whispered goodbye. I'll find out what really happened, she said to the fresh grave. I promise. Nate covered the grave while Clara stood frozen, not from cold, but from grief that threatened to swallow her whole. When he finished, he planted the simple wooden cross she'd made the night before. My ranch is about 3 miles east. he said, brushing dirt from his hands. You're welcome to warm up there before heading back to town. I'm not staying in town. Nate raised an eyebrow. William's property, Clara explained. I'm staying there. Something flickered across Nate's face. Concern, maybe, or warning. Ma'am, that cabin's been empty for 2 weeks. In this weather. I know what I'm doing, Mr. Callahan. Do you... He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Do you know that Cornelius Ashford has been trying to buy that land for 2 years? Do you know your brother refused to sell, and now he's dead? Do you know Ashford's men have been watching that property since the day William was buried? Clara felt ice spread through her veins, colder than the Montana winter. How do you know all this? Because I've been watching them watch. Nate put his hat back on. I told you, your brother was a good man. Someone needs to know the truth about how he died. They stood in the cemetery snow, falling heavier now, 2 strangers bound by a dead man's memory. Tell me everything, Clara said. Not here. I meant it when I said, then where? Nate studied her for a long moment. Whatever he saw in her face seemed to satisfy him. Follow me to Riverbend, my ranch. We'll talk there. Clara's horse was tied at the cemetery entrance, a rented mare from the livery stable in town. She mounted stiffly, her muscles screaming in protest. Nate was already on his horse, a powerful black stallion that seemed as serious as its owner. They rode in silence through the snow. Clara's mind raced with questions, but she forced herself to wait. If what Nate was suggesting was true, if William had been murdered. The ranch appeared through the snow like a mirage. A solid 2-story house. A large barn corrals full of horses despite the weather. Smoke rose from the chimney, promising warmth. Thomas, Nate called as they approached. Company coming? A man emerged from the barn. Clara's breath caught when she saw him, Native American, maybe in his 40s, with long dark hair streaked with gray. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone completely at home in this land. Miss Whitmore, Thomas said, inclining his head. I am sorry about your brother. He was a friend. You knew him too. Everyone knew William. Thomas took the reins of Clara's horse. Everyone liked him. That was the problem. Clara looked between the 2 men. Will someone please tell me what's going on? Inside, Nate said. You're turning blue again. The warmth of the ranch house hit Clara like a physical force. She hadn't realized how cold she was until heat surrounded her, making her skin prickle and burn. Sit by the fire, Nate instructed, pulling a chair closer to the hearth. I'll make coffee. I don't need coffee, he repeated firmly. Then we talk. Clara sat too exhausted to argue. She looked around the room, simple but well-maintained, with practical furniture and few decorations. A soldier's home, she thought, efficient and without sentiment. Nate returned with 2 cups, handing one to Clara. The coffee was strong and bitter, exactly what she needed. Start from the beginning, she said. Why do you think my brother was murdered? Nate sat across from her, cradling his own cup. Thomas had come inside and stood near the door, arms crossed. Your brother's property sits on the headwaters of Silver Creek, Nate began. That creek feeds every ranch and farm in the valley. Whoever controls that land controls the water. Controls the water, controls everything. And this Ashford wants that control. Ashford owns the mining company, but mining's just the beginning. He wants to build a dam, redirect the water for his operations. Nate's voice hardened. Every ranch in this valley would dry up within a year. Folks would have no choice but to sell to him for pennies on the dollar. Clara felt sick. William never mentioned any of this in his letters. He didn't want to worry you. That's what he told me. Nate set down his cup. But he was scared, Clara. Last time I saw him, maybe 3 weeks ago, he said Ashford's men had been coming around more often, making threats. What kind of threats? Thomas spoke up. They said accidents happen in these mountains, especially to men who don't know when to walk away. Clara's hands shook, splashing coffee over the rim of her cup. She set it down quickly. The sheriff, she said. Surely the sheriff... Sheriff Duggan is in Ashford's pocket. Nate's tone was bitter. Has been for years. Why do you think the death was ruled an accident so fast? No investigation. No questions. They found William at the bottom of a ravine near the old silver mine. Said he must have lost his footing on the ice. William grew up in these mountains, Clara said slowly. He wrote to me about climbing those trails since he was a boy. He wouldn't just fall. No, he wouldn't. Silence fell over the room. The fire crackled and popped. I saw it, Thomas said quietly. Clara's head snapped up. What? Thomas pushed away from the door, moving closer. His face was troubled, weighted with something that looked like guilt. I was hunting that morning up in the high country. I heard shouting, looked down, saw 3 men with William near the ridge. Thomas's voice was barely above a whisper. They pushed him. I saw them push him. Clara couldn't breathe. Why? Why didn't you tell anyone? Thomas laughed, but there was no humor in it. Tell who? The sheriff, who works for the man who ordered it. The townspeople who won't look me in the eye because of the color of my skin. He shook his head. My word against 3 white men. I'd be dead before sunrise. But now you're telling me. Because now there's someone else who wants the truth. Thomas met her eyes. Your brother saved my life once years ago. I couldn't save his, but maybe I can help you make this right. Clara stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white. The men who did it, she said without turning around. Do you know who they were? 2 of them work for Ashford, regular hired hands. Thomas hesitated. The 3rd was Ashford's foreman, man named Marcus Webb. He's dangerous, Miss Whitmore. More dangerous than Ashford himself. I don't care how dangerous he is. You should. Nate was behind her now, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. These aren't men who play by rules. They've killed before. They'll kill again. Clara turned to face him. They were inches apart, and she could see the concern in his eyes. Real concern, not the patronizing kind she'd encountered so often from men. So what do you suggest I do? Her voice was steady, but her heart was pounding. Run back to Boston. Pretend my brother's death was an accident. Let these men win. That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying? Nate held her gaze. I'm saying if you're going to fight, you shouldn't fight alone. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Why? Clara asked. Why would you help me? You don't know me. I knew your brother. That's enough. Nate stepped back, breaking the intensity of the moment. And I've watched Ashford hurt too many people in this valley. Someone needs to stop him. Clara thought about the empty cemetery, the townspeople who wouldn't come, the minister who was too busy, the undertaker who wanted payment before compassion. She thought about William, who had written her such hopeful letters about building a life in Montana, who had encouraged her to join him after her husband died. If I stay, she said slowly, if I fight, I need to know I can trust you. You can. Everyone in Silver Creek seems trustworthy until they're not. Nate nodded, accepting this. Fair enough. Trust is earned. I'll prove myself. He glanced at Thomas. We both will. And in return you don't do anything stupid like confronting Ashford alone. Nate's expression was serious. You're brave, Clara. I can see that. But brave people die too. William was brave. The mention of her brother sent a fresh wave of grief through her. She swallowed hard against it. I'm staying at William's property tonight, she said. Whatever you say. I figured. Nate sighed. At least let Thomas ride out with you, check the cabin, make sure it's secure. Clara wanted to refuse on principle. She'd been taking care of herself for years through her husband's illness, his death, the struggles of widowhood in a society that didn't know what to do with single women. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the genuine concern in Nate's voice. Maybe it was the knowledge of what she was up against. Or maybe after 3 days of facing this cold town alone, she was simply tired of pretending she didn't need help. Fine, she said. But I'm not staying here overnight. That cabin is mine now, and I won't be driven away from it by fear. A ghost of a smile crossed Nate's face. Just like William said, stubborn. It's not stubbornness. It's principle. Looks the same from where I'm standing. Despite everything, the grief, the fear, the uncertainty, Clara felt something unexpected. A spark of warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. "I should go before the snow gets worse," she said, looking away. "I'll ride out tomorrow to check on you," Nate said. "If that's all right." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Thomas was already heading for the door. "I'll saddle a horse. Give me 5 minutes." When he was gone, Clara and Nate stood in awkward silence. "Thank you," Clara finally said, "for helping with the burial, for telling me the truth. Everyone else in this town just wants me gone." "That's because you scare them." Clara blinked. "I scare them? A woman alone claiming property that Ashford wants, asking questions about her brother's death." Nate shrugged. "You're a threat to the comfortable lies they've been telling themselves. It's easier to push you out than face the truth. And you're different. I've never been comfortable with lies." He walked her to the door, helping her into her coat. "Besides, I made William a promise once. He made me swear that if anything happened to him, I'd look after whoever came to claim his land." Clara paused, one arm in her sleeve. He knew something might happen. He suspected. Last few months things got worse, more threats. His dog was killed. Accident, they called it. Nate helped her finish with the coat. He was preparing for the worst. He just ran out of time. Did he know who to trust in town, I mean? Anyone? Nate considered the question. "Ruth Baker at the boarding house. She's prickly as a cactus, but she's honest. And Doc Holloway, he's a good man, just scared. Ashford owns his debt." Clara filed away the names. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. We haven't done anything." Outside, Thomas was waiting with the horses. The snow had lightened slightly, but the temperature was dropping fast. "Miss Whitmore." Thomas handed her the reins. "Stay on the main road until we pass the old mill, then we'll cut through the valley. It's faster." Clara mounted, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. "Clara." Nate's voice made her turn. He stood on the porch, silhouetted against the warm light from inside. "Lock your doors tonight. Don't open them for anyone you don't know." "I'm not a child, Mr. Callahan." "I know. That's what worries me. Children run from danger. You seem like the type to run toward it." She couldn't argue with that. "Good night, Mr. Callahan." "Nate," he corrected. "Good night, Nate." She urged her horse forward, Thomas falling in beside her. As they rode away from Riverbend, Clara looked back once. Nate was still standing on the porch, watching them disappear into the snow. The ride to William's property took nearly an hour. By the time the cabin came into view, Clara was frozen through her teeth, chattering so hard she could barely speak. Thomas dismounted first, approaching the cabin with caution. "Stay here," he said quietly. Clara watched as he circled the small building, checking windows, examining tracks in the snow. When he returned, his expression was troubled. "Someone's been here. Recently. Boot prints around the back window." Clara's stomach dropped. "Inside?" "Doesn't look like they got in, but they tried." Thomas helped her down from her horse. "I'll stay outside tonight. Keep watch." "Thomas, you can't." "I can, and I will." His tone left no room for argument. "Your brother saved my life, Miss Whitmore. This is the least I can do." Clara wanted to argue she'd been fighting her own battles her whole life, but exhaustion and cold won out. "There's a barn," she said. "At least stay there. It's not much warmer, but it's shelter." Thomas nodded. "That works." Inside the cabin was exactly as Clara had feared, cold, dusty, and filled with William's possessions, now monuments to a life cut short. She lit the stove first, feeding it dried wood until flames caught. Then she lit every lamp, pushing back the darkness. William's coat still hung by the door. His books were stacked on a small table. A half-written letter sat on the desk. Clara picked it up with trembling hands. "Dear Clara, I hope this letter finds you in good spirits. Things here have been difficult lately, but I don't want to worry you. I've been thinking about your visit in the spring, and I can't wait to show you the land. The creek is beautiful when the snow melts. There's something I need to tell you, though. Something I've been putting off. The men who own the mining company. The letter ended there, unfinished. Clara sank into the chair, pressing the paper to her chest. Oh, William, what were you going to tell me? Outside. The wind howled, rattling the windows. Somewhere in the darkness, Thomas was keeping watch. And at Riverbend, Nate Callahan was probably sitting by his fire wondering if she'd made it safely. Tomorrow, Clara decided. Tomorrow she would go into town, face whatever hostility waited for her, and start asking questions. Ashford thought he could scare her away. He thought wrong. She was Clara Whitmore, widow nurse survivor. She had watched her husband die slowly over 2 years and kept going. She had faced disease and death in Boston's worst hospitals and never flinched. She had buried her brother alone in a blizzard when no one else would help. These men had no idea what they were dealing with. Clara set the unfinished letter on the desk, smoothing out the creases. I'll finish what you started, William, she whispered. I promise, whatever it takes. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering tracks and secrets alike. But Clara knew some things couldn't stay buried forever. Sooner or later, the truth always found its way to the surface. And when it did, she would be ready. Morning came with pale winter light, filtering through frost-covered windows. Clara woke stiff and sore, her muscles protesting every movement. The fire had died down overnight, and her breath made small clouds in the cold air. She forced herself up, fed the stove, and splashed icy water on her face from the basin. There was no time for self-pity. Today she would go into Silver Creek. Today she would start asking questions. A knock at the door made her freeze. Miss Whitmore? It's Thomas. Clara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She opened the door to find Thomas standing on the porch, snow dusting his shoulders. Anyone come by? She asked. No, but there were riders on the ridge about an hour before dawn, watching. Thomas's expression was grim. They left when the sun started coming up. Clara's jaw tightened. Ashford's men? Most likely. She grabbed her coat from the hook. I'm going into town this morning. I need supplies, and I need to start understanding who I'm dealing with. Thomas nodded slowly. You want company? Clara hesitated. Part of her wanted to say yes, but she knew what would happen if she rode into Silver Creek with a Native American man at her side. The townspeople already wanted her gone. No need to give them more ammunition. Better if I go alone, she said carefully. But thank you. Thomas understood. She could see it in his eyes, that weary acceptance of how things were. Be careful, he said. Ashford has eyes everywhere in that town. I will. The ride into Silver Creek took 40 minutes. Clara used the time to think, to plan, to prepare herself for whatever hostility awaited. By the time the town came into view, she had steeled her nerves into something resembling calm. Silver Creek was larger than she'd expected. A main street lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple rising above the rooftops, smoke curling from dozens of chimneys. People moved along the boardwalks, going about their morning business. Clara tied her horse outside the general store and stepped inside. The warmth was immediate and welcome, as was the smell of coffee and dried goods. A heavy-set man behind the counter looked up at her entrance. Help you, miss? I need supplies. Flour, salt, coffee, dried beans. Clara pulled out the list she'd made. And lamp oil, if you have it. The man took the list, scanning it briefly. You're the Whitmore woman, the one staying out at William's place. It wasn't a question. I am. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite hostility, but close. A lot of folks figured you'd be heading back east by now. Then a lot of folks figured wrong. He grunted and began gathering her supplies. Clara watched him, noting how he avoided meeting her eyes, how his movements were just a little too careful. Did you know my brother? She asked. The man's hands paused on a sack of flour. Everyone knew William. And what? Clara stepped closer to the counter. My brother is dead, Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson. My brother is dead, and no one in this town seems willing to talk about it. I find that strange, don't you? Henderson finally looked at her, and Clara saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. "Miss Whitmore," he said quietly, "some things in this town are better left alone, for everyone's sake." "Whose sake exactly?" "Yours." "Mr. Ashford's—" Henderson flinched at the name. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do." For a moment, Clara thought he might actually tell her something. But then the store's door opened, bringing a gust of cold air and a well-dressed man she'd never seen before. "Mrs. Henderson needs her order delivered by noon," the newcomer said without preamble. Then he noticed Clara and stopped. "Well, well, you must be the sister." Clara turned to face him fully. He was perhaps 50, with silver-streaked dark hair and cold gray eyes that assessed her like she was livestock at auction. "And you must be Cornelius Ashford." A thin smile crossed his face. "My reputation precedes me." "Your reputation is precisely why I know who you are." Ashford's smile didn't waver, but something hardened behind his eyes. "Henderson, give us a moment, won't you?" The shopkeeper practically fled to the back room. Clara stood her ground as Ashford moved closer, stopping just inside the boundary of polite distance. "Miss Whitmore, I'm so sorry for your loss. William was a fine man." "Was he strange that you'd think so, given how hard you tried to take his land?" Ashford's eyebrows rose slightly. "Direct. I appreciate that." He clasped his hands behind his back. "Your brother and I had business disagreements, that's true, but I bore him no ill will." "Is that so?" "It is." Ashford's tone remained pleasant, almost friendly. "In fact, I'd like to extend an olive branch. Your brother's property is valuable, yes, but it's also remote difficult to maintain, especially for a woman alone. I'm prepared to offer you a very generous price. Enough to return to Boston comfortably, start fresh." Clara felt something cold settle in her chest. "And if I don't want to sell—" "Everyone wants to sell eventually, Miss Whitmore. It's just a matter of finding the right price." He paused meaningfully. "Or the right motivation." "Is that a threat?" "Merely an observation." Ashford smiled again, all teeth and no warmth. "Winter here is harsh. Accidents happen. Fires falls, animals attacking livestock. It would be a shame if something were to happen to you the way it happened to your brother." Clara's hands curled into fists at her sides. "My brother's death was no accident." "The sheriff ruled it so." "The sheriff works for you." For just a moment, Ashford's mask slipped. Clara saw the predator underneath, cold and calculating and utterly without mercy. "Careful, Miss Whitmore. Accusations like that can be dangerous." "So can murder." They stood facing each other, the air between them crackling with tension. Then Ashford laughed a soft, chilling sound. "I like you. You have spirit." He turned toward the door. "But spirit only takes you so far in this country. Think about my offer. It won't stay on the table forever." He left without waiting for a response. Clara stood alone in the store, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Henderson emerged from the back room, his face pale. "Miss Whitmore, you shouldn't have done that." "Done what?" "Refused to be intimidated." "You don't understand how things work here." Henderson lowered his voice. "Ashford owns this town. The sheriff, the bank, half the businesses on this street. People who cross him, things happen to them. Things like what happened to my brother." Henderson looked away. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Clara gathered her supplies, paid with coins from her dwindling reserve, and headed for the door. She paused with her hand on the handle. "Mr. Henderson, if you ever find your courage, you know where to find me." She stepped out onto the boardwalk, squinting against the bright winter sun, reflecting off snow. Her encounter with Ashford had confirmed everything Nate and Thomas had told her. The man was a predator, and he had her in his sights. Good. Let him look. Clara wasn't prey. She was loading supplies into her saddlebags when a voice called out, "You're either very brave or very foolish." Clara turned. An older woman stood nearby, arms crossed over a wool shawl. She had sharp eyes, silver hair pinned severely back, and a face that looked like it had never smiled in its life. "Which do you think?" Clara asked. "Jury's still out." The woman stepped closer. "Ruth Baker. I own the boarding house." Clara remembered what Nate had said. Ruth Baker at the boarding house. She's prickly as a cactus, but she's honest. "Clara Whitmore." "I know who you are. Whole town knows." Ruth's eyes swept over her appraisingly. "Heard you buried your brother alone yesterday, in that storm." The townspeople made their feelings clear. "Cowards, the lot of them." Ruth spat the words like they tasted bitter. "Your brother was a good man. Deserved better than that." Clara felt unexpected tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. "Why didn't you come then?" "Bad hip. Can't ride in this weather." Ruth's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "But I would have, for what that's worth." It was worth more than Clara could say. She swallowed hard. "You're one of the first people in this town to say anything kind about William." "That's because most folks here are too scared to remember kindness." Ruth glanced around, lowering her voice. "Listen, I don't know what you're planning, but if you're going up against Ashford, you need to know what you're dealing with. Come by the boarding house tonight. Use the back door. We should talk." Before Clara could respond, Ruth turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Clara finished loading her supplies, her mind spinning. An ally, or at least a potential one. It was more than she'd had an hour ago. She was about to mount her horse when she spotted a man watching her from across the street. Tall, thin, with a scar running down the left side of his face. He didn't look away when their eyes met. Instead, he smiled a cold slash of a thing that made Clara's skin crawl. Marcus Webb. It had to be. Ashford's foreman. The man Thomas had seen push William off that ridge. Clara forced herself to hold his gaze for a long moment before looking away. She mounted her horse with deliberate calm and rode out of town at an easy pace, refusing to show fear. But inside her heart was racing. She had enemies now, real enemies, and they weren't bothering to hide anymore. The road back to William's cabin was empty, but Clara couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow between the trees, every movement in her peripheral vision, set her nerves on edge. She was halfway home when she heard hoofbeats behind her. Clara's hand went to the revolver at her hip, a gun that had belonged to her husband, and that she'd practiced with obsessively in the months after his death. She turned in her saddle ready. Nate Callahan raised both hands as his horse slowed. "Just me." Clara let out a breath. "You shouldn't sneak up on people." "Wasn't sneaking. You were lost in thought." He fell into pace beside her. "Heard you paid a visit to town this morning?" "Word travels fast." "Small town." Nate's expression was serious. "Also heard you had a conversation with Ashford. Is there anything that happens in Silver Creek you don't know about?" "Not much. That's how I stay alive." He looked at her closely. "You all right?" Clara considered the question. Was she all right? She'd stood face to face with the man who'd almost certainly ordered her brother's murder, had been threatened, barely disguised, and had made an enemy of one of the most powerful men in the territory. "I'm fine," she said. Nate snorted. "You're a terrible liar." "I'm not lying. I am fine." Clara met his eyes. "I'm also angry. Angry at Ashford, angry at this town for its cowardice, angry at myself for not coming sooner when William might have needed me." "Would it have made a difference?" "I don't know. Maybe." Her voice cracked slightly. "He tried to tell me something, in his last letter. He was warning me about Ashford, about the mining company, but he never finished." Nate was quiet for a moment. "William was trying to protect you. That's who he was." "Well, he's not here to protect me anymore, so I'll have to protect myself." Clara straightened in her saddle. "And then I'll make sure the men who killed him face justice." "How?" "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out." They rode in silence for a while. The snow had stopped falling, and the afternoon sun was actually warm against Clara's face. "Ruth Baker wants to meet with me tonight," she said finally. Nate nodded. "Good. Ruth knows things about this town that nobody else does. She's been here since the beginning." "Can I trust her?" With your life. No hesitation in his voice. Ruth lost her husband to Ashford's schemes 10 years ago. Mine collapsed, that wasn't really an accident. She's been waiting for someone with enough courage to stand up to him ever since. Clara absorbed this. Why hasn't she done it herself? She's tried. But she's old alone, and a woman in a town run by men who don't think women matter. Nate's jaw tightened. Ashford ignores her because he thinks she's harmless. That's his mistake. They reached the turnoff to William's property. Clara reined in her horse. Thank you for checking on me. I said I would. Nate hesitated, then reached into his saddlebag. I brought you something. He handed her a small leather journal, worn and water-stained. What is this? Found it in William's things months ago. He asked me to hold on to it, said he'd know when the time was right to use it. Nate's expression was somber. I think the time is now. Clara opened the journal carefully. Inside, in William's familiar handwriting, were pages and pages of notes. Dates, names, transactions. A record of everything Ashford had done in Silver Creek for the past 2 years. He was building a case, she breathed. He was trying to take Ashford down legally, gathering evidence, talking to people who'd been hurt. Nate shook his head. I think Ashford found out. That's why. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Clara clutched the journal to her chest. This could be enough. If I can get it to the right people, someone outside Ashford's control. The territorial marshal, Nate said. In Helena. He's honest from what I hear. But getting there in winter alone? I'm not going anywhere yet. First, I need to understand everything in here. And I need to find more evidence. Clara looked up at Nate. Will you help me? You know I will. Something passed between them in that moment. Trust, maybe. Or the beginning of it. Be careful tonight, Nate said. Going to Ruth's. Webb has been watching everyone who might be sympathetic to your cause. I'll use the back door. She told me to. Smart woman. Nate tipped his hat. I'll come by tomorrow morning. We can go through the journal together. Clara watched him right away, then turned toward the cabin. Thomas was waiting on the porch, and she could tell from his expression that he'd been worried. Trouble in town? He asked. Met Ashford. Thomas's face darkened. And he threatened me. Politely. Clara dismounted, handing Thomas the reins. But I also found an ally. Maybe two. Ruth Baker. You know her. Everyone knows Ruth. She's the only person in Silver Creek who never treated me like I was less than human. Thomas glanced at the journal in her hands. What's that? Clara told him about William's notes about the evidence her brother had been gathering. Thomas listened in silence, his expression unreadable. Your brother was brave, he said finally. Braver than I knew. He was trying to do the right thing. And he died for it. Thomas met her eyes. You understand that could happen to you too. Clara didn't look away. Yes. And you're still going to fight? Yes. Thomas nodded slowly. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. Then I'll help however I can. I owed William my life. I owe you the truth about his death. That's all I'm asking. Inside the cabin, Clara spent the afternoon reading through William's journal. The more she read, the angrier she became. Page after page documented Ashford's crimes, bribes to officials, threats to landowners, suspicious deaths ruled as accidents. Her brother had been meticulous, careful, thorough, and someone had betrayed him. Clara paused on an entry from 3 weeks before William's death. Someone is feeding information to Ashford. Every move I make he knows about before I make it. I thought I could trust everyone I've been working with, but clearly I was wrong. Need to be more careful. Need to figure out who. Clara stared at the words, her blood running cold. William had suspected a traitor in his midst. Had he figured out who it was before he died? Or had the traitor figured out that William was onto them? She flipped through the remaining pages, but there was no answer. The last entry was dated 2 days before his death. A simple note. Meeting with T tomorrow. He says he has proof. T. Who was T? Thomas. Clara's heart clenched. Thomas had been the one to tell her about witnessing William's murder. Thomas had been staying at her cabin keeping watch. Thomas had access to everything. No. She shook her head. Thomas had been with Nate for years. If he were working for Ashford, why would he have told her what he saw? Why would he be helping her now? Unless it was a trap. Clara pressed her hands to her temples. This was what Ashford wanted, she realized. He wanted her paranoid, unable to trust anyone, isolated and alone. That's how he operated. Divide and conquer. She wouldn't let him win. But she also wouldn't be naive. From now on, she would verify everything. Trust, but verify. The sun was setting when Clara prepared to leave for Ruth Baker's boarding house. She changed into darker clothes, tucked William's journal into a hidden pocket in her coat, and checked her revolver. "I'll be back before midnight," she told Thomas. He nodded, not asking where she was going. "I'll keep watch." Clara rode into town using back trails Nate had told her about, avoiding the main road. The boarding house was a large two-story building on a quiet street. She tied her horse in the alley behind it and knocked softly on the back door. Ruth opened it immediately, ushering her inside. "Anyone follow you?" "No, I was careful." "Good." Ruth led her through a small kitchen and into a cozy sitting room where a fire burned low in the hearth. "Sit, I'll make tea." Clara sat looking around the room. It was comfortable, filled with the accumulation of decades' photographs, books, quilts draped over chairs. A life fully lived. Ruth returned with 2 cups and settled into the chair across from Clara. "So," she said, "you want to take down Cornelius Ashford?" "I want justice for my brother." "Same thing." Ruth sipped her tea. "I've been waiting 20 years for someone to do it. Tried myself after my Henry died in that mine. But no one would listen to an old woman's grief. I'm sorry about your husband. Long time ago now, but I haven't forgotten." Ruth's eyes were sharp and bright. "And I haven't stopped collecting information. Everything Ashford does in this town I know about. People talk when they think no one important is listening." Clara leaned forward. "What do you know about my brother's death?" "I know it wasn't an accident. I know Webb was involved, probably 2 of his men as well. I know Ashford gave the order." Ruth's voice was matter-of-fact. "What I don't know is how to prove it." Clara pulled out William's journal. "My brother was gathering evidence. Nate gave this to me today." Ruth's eyes widened as she took the journal, flipping through pages. Good Lord, William documented everything. Almost everything. He suspected there was a traitor, someone feeding information to Ashford, but he never identified who. Ruth was quiet for a long moment, reading. Then she looked up, her expression troubled. "Clara, there's something you should know. About the doctor. Dr. Holloway. He's a good man, but he owes Ashford money. A lot of it. Gambling debts from before he came to Silver Creek." Ruth set down the journal. "Ashford bought up those debts. Uses them to keep Holloway in line." Clara's stomach tightened. "What does that mean for me?" "It means be careful what you tell him. Holloway wants to do right, but when a man's trapped, he doesn't always have choices." Could he have been the one feeding information to Ashford, the traitor William wrote about? Ruth shook her head slowly. "I don't think so. Holloway didn't know William well, and your brother was careful about who he talked to. But someone was watching. Someone close." They sat in silence, the fire crackling softly. "I need to get this evidence to the territorial marshal," Clara said finally. "But I can't leave yet. I need more, something that directly connects Ashford to William's murder." Thomas Crow Feather saw it happen. A Native American man's testimony against 3 white men. You know how that would go. Ruth sighed heavily. "I do. This territory has a long way to go before justice is truly blind." She paused, thinking. There might be another way. The men who pushed William, they talk when they drink. And they drink often at the Lucky Dollar Saloon. "You want me to go to a saloon?" "Not you. Me." A fierce smile crossed Ruth's weathered face. "I own that building. Lease it to Frank Morrison. He owes me favors and his bartender owes me more. If those men have said anything that could be used against them, I'll find out." Clara felt a surge of hope, small but real. Why are you helping me? Really? Ruth was quiet for a moment. Because I'm 73 years old, and I've spent too much of my life being afraid. Because your brother was one of the few people who treated me with respect after Henry died. And because someone needs to stop Ashford before he destroys everything good in this valley. She reached over and gripped Clara's hand with surprising strength. You're not alone in this, child. I know it feels that way. But there are good people in Silver Creek who are just waiting for someone to lead. Be that someone. Clara rode home through the darkness, Ruth's words echoing in her mind. Be that someone. She wasn't sure she could. She was just a widow from Boston, a nurse who'd never done anything more dangerous than 10 dying patients. What did she know about fighting powerful men, about exposing murderers, about leading anyone? But then she thought of William alone in his cabin, documenting every crime he witnessed. He hadn't been a hero either. He'd just been a man who couldn't look away from injustice. Maybe that was enough. Maybe courage wasn't about being fearless. Maybe it was about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. When she reached the cabin, Thomas was waiting as promised. He didn't ask questions, just took her horse to the barn. Clara went inside and sat at William's desk, staring at his unfinished letter. The men who own the mining company. I'm going to finish what you started, she whispered. Whatever it takes. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the pines. Another storm was coming. But Clara didn't feel the cold anymore. She felt something else entirely. Purpose. 3 days passed. 3 days of waiting, planning, and watching shadows grow longer as winter tightened its grip on Silver Creek. Clara spent her mornings going through William's journal with Nate, piecing together the web of corruption her brother had uncovered. Every afternoon she practiced shooting behind the cabin until her aim was steady and true. Every evening she sat by the fire reading William's words, letting his voice guide her. On the 4th morning, Ruth Baker arrived at the cabin, her face flushed from the cold ride. I found something, she said before Clara could even greet her. Last night at the Lucky Dollar, one of Webb's men got drunk and started bragging. Clara ushered her inside, where Nate and Thomas were already waiting. Ruth didn't waste time. His name is Billy Crane, young, stupid, and desperate to impress anyone who'll listen. Ruth accepted the coffee Thomas offered. He told Frank Morrison's bartender that Webb promised him extra pay for a special job a few weeks back. A job that involved making sure some troublemaker fell off a cliff. Clara's heart pounded. He admitted to killing William. Not in those exact words, but close enough. Ruth's eyes gleamed. And there's more. Crane mentioned paperwork, something Webb had them sign before the job. A contract, if you can believe it. Ashford's so paranoid about loyalty that he makes his men sign agreements for dirty work. Nate leaned forward. Where would Webb keep something like that? That's the question. Ruth set down her cup. Crane was too drunk to remember the details, but he said Webb keeps important papers in his office at the mining company. Said Webb always jokes that he has enough evidence to hang half the men in Ashford's employ, including Ashford himself. Silence fell over the room. If we could get those papers, Clara said slowly, we'd have proof, real proof that Ashford ordered William's murder. Getting into that office won't be easy, Thomas said. Webb has guards and the mining company is crawling with Ashford's men. There might be a way. Ruth looked at Clara. The Christmas social is in 2 days. Every year, Ashford hosts a party at his mansion for the town's respectable citizens. It's his way of pretending he's a generous benefactor instead of a thief and murderer. And during this party, most of his men will be at the mansion providing security. The mining company offices will be nearly empty. Ruth paused. But someone would still need to get in, find the papers, and get out without being caught. Clara didn't hesitate. I'll do it. Absolutely not. Nate's voice was sharp. Clara, if you're caught, if I'm caught, I'm the sister of a man who died at that mine, searching for answers about my brother's death. Grieving widow doesn't know what she's doing. Clara met his eyes steadily. What's Ashford going to do, arrest me for trespassing? That would only draw more attention to his operation. He could do worse than arrest you. He could, but he won't not publicly not with the whole town watching him play generous host. Clara stood up, pacing to the window. This is the best chance we'll have, maybe the only chance. Thomas spoke up. She's not wrong. Ashford cares about appearances. During the social, he'll want everything to look legitimate. Nate ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. And what about after? When he realizes someone took his evidence, by then, we'll be on our way to Helena. Clara turned back to face them. The territorial marshal. If we can get the papers to him before Ashford realizes they're gone. It's risky, Ruth said quietly, but it might work. Nate stood abruptly, crossing to where Clara stood. He took her hands in his, and she could feel them trembling slightly. Clara, I can't lose you. Not like this. The raw emotion in his voice made her chest ache. Over the past weeks, something had grown between them. Something neither had named, but both felt. Late-night conversations that stretched into early morning. Shared meals. The way his eyes followed her when she moved around the cabin. The way she found herself listening for the sound of his horse. You won't lose me, she said softly. You can't promise that. No, I can't. Clara squeezed his hands. But I can't walk away either. Not now. Not when we're this close. Nate was quiet for a long moment. Then he released her hands and stepped back. If you're doing this, I'm coming with you. Nate. Not negotiable. His jaw was set, his eyes determined. You're not going into that building alone. Clara wanted to argue. The plan was dangerous enough without adding another person, but looking at Nate's face, she knew it would be futile. And truthfully, the thought of having him beside her was more comforting than she wanted to admit. Fine, but we do this my way. Careful, quiet, no unnecessary risks. Agreed. Ruth stood brushing off her skirts. I'll make sure you're both invited to the social. Ashford won't think twice about it. He invites everyone who owns property in the valley. It's part of his show. She headed for the door, then paused. 2 days. Use them wisely. After she left, the four of them planned late into the night. Thomas would stay at the cabin as a decoy, making it look like Clara was home. Ruth would attend the social and create a distraction if needed. Nate and Clara would slip away during the festivities, make their way to the mining company, find Webb's office, and retrieve the papers. Simple in theory, terrifying in practice. The night before the social, Clara couldn't sleep. She sat by the dying fire, William's journal in her lap, reading entries she'd already memorized. A soft knock at the door made her heart jump. She grabbed her revolver before answering. Nate stood on the porch, snow dusting his shoulders. Saw your light, he said. Couldn't sleep either. Clara stepped aside to let him in. Too much thinking. Nate settled into the chair across from hers, stretching his legs toward the fire. For a while, neither spoke. The silence between them was comfortable now, a familiar thing. Can I ask you something? Clara finally said. Anything. Why did you really stay in Silver Creek, I mean? With everything Ashford has done, all the people he's driven away? Why didn't you leave? Nate stared into the flames. I thought about it, more than once. After Henry Baker died, after the Millers lost their farm, after a dozen other injustices I couldn't stop. He paused. But this land, Clara, I came here with nothing, built Riverbend with my own hands. Every fence post, every board in that house. This is the first place that's ever been mine. And Ashford can't take that from you. He's tried. Offered to buy me out 3 times. Threatened me twice. A ghost of a smile crossed Nate's face. I'm stubborn. I noticed. Their eyes met and something shifted in the air between them. Nate leaned forward, his expression growing serious. Clara, tomorrow night, whatever happens, don't. I need to say this. He took a breath. I've spent years keeping people at arm's length. After what happened with my engagement, I told myself I was better off alone. No complications, no heartbreak. Clara's breath caught. He'd never mentioned an engagement before. Her name was Margaret. We were going to be married back in Ohio. But she was more interested in the Callahan family money than in me. Bitterness crept into his voice. When my father's debts came to light after his death, she was gone before the funeral was over. Nate, I'm sorry. Ancient history. He shook his head. Point is, I swore I'd never let anyone that close again. It was easier that way. Safer. Clara waited, her heart pounding. Then you showed up. Nate looked at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her chest ache. Standing in that cemetery, half frozen, too stubborn to let anyone help you bury your brother. And something changed. I don't know how to explain it. I just knew I couldn't walk away. Nate. I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I know you've got enough to deal with. Your brother Ashford, all of it. I just needed you to know that whatever happens tomorrow, you matter to me. More than I ever expected anyone to matter again. Clara set aside the journal and crossed to where he sat. She knelt in front of him, taking his hands the way he'd taken hers that morning. I was married for 6 years, she said quietly. To a good man who got sick and died slowly, piece by piece, while I watched. After he was gone, I told myself the same thing you did. Easier alone, safer alone. Nate's fingers tightened around hers. But you're right. Something changed. Clara smiled softly. You rode up to that cemetery like some kind of stubborn, snow-covered guardian angel, and you haven't left me alone since. Guardian angel. A surprised laugh escaped him. That's a new one. Don't let it go to your head. Nate's expression softened. He lifted one hand to cup her face, his thumb tracing gently along her cheekbone. Clara Whitmore. What am I going to do with you? Help me survive tomorrow night. We can figure out the rest later. Is that a promise? Clara leaned into his touch. It's a promise. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her. The air between them was charged electric with possibility. But Nate pulled back slightly, his thumb still resting on her cheek. Later, he said, his voice rough. When this is over. Clara nodded, understanding. Tomorrow night could change everything. They couldn't afford distractions. But as Nate left and Clara finally found sleep, her dreams were filled with possibilities she hadn't let herself imagine in years. The day of the Christmas social dawned cold and bright. Clara spent the morning going over the plan one more time, then the afternoon preparing herself for the evening. Ruth had sent over a dress, deep blue velvet, with white lace trim. It was finer than anything Clara owned, clearly borrowed from someone who'd once had money. You clean up nice, Thomas said when she emerged from the bedroom. Clara smoothed the skirt self-consciously. I feel like I'm wearing a costume. You're playing a part. Tonight you're a grieving sister trying to integrate into society, not a woman planning to rob the most powerful man in the territory. When you put it that way. Nate arrived as the sun was setting, dressed in a dark suit that made him look like a different person. Clara had never seen him in anything but work clothes. The transformation was startling. Don't stare, he said, clearly uncomfortable. Ruth insisted. You look distinguished. I look like a banker. He tugged at his collar. Let's get this over with. The ride to Ashford's mansion took half an hour. As they crested the final hill, Clara's breath caught despite herself. The house was enormous, 3 stories of stone and glass, every window blazing with light. Carriages lined the circular drive and laughter drifted out into the cold night air. Remember the plan, Nate murmured as they approached. We stay visible for the first hour. Make sure people see us. Then during the dinner service we slip out through the servants' entrance. Clara knotted her stomach tight with nerves. Inside the mansion was even more impressive. Crystal chandeliers, imported wallpaper furnishings that probably cost more than most farms in the valley. Clara forced herself to smile, to nod at people she barely knew, to play the part of the grateful newcomer. Ashford found them almost immediately. Miss Whitmore, Mr. Callahan. He was all charm tonight, his predator's smile softened for public consumption. How delightful that you could join us. Thank you for the invitation, Clara managed. I do hope you're settling in well, despite our previous misunderstandings. I'm managing. Of course you are. Strong woman like yourself. Ashford's eyes glittered. Your brother always spoke highly of your resilience. Clara felt Nate stiffen beside her, but she kept her expression neutral. William was kind. Indeed he was. A shame about what happened. Ashford sipped his champagne. Such a senseless tragedy. Every word was a knife, and he knew it. Clara could see the satisfaction in his eyes, the pleasure he took in her discomfort. If you'll excuse us, Nate said, his voice tight. I believe Miss Whitmore needs some refreshment. He steered Clara away before Ashford could respond. When they were safely across the room, Clara let out a shaky breath. That man is evil. I know, but we can't let him see he's getting to us. Nate handed her a glass of punch. 1 hour. Then we move. The hour crawled by. Clara made small talk with women who clearly didn't trust her, smiled at men who looked at her with too much interest, and pretended to admire decorations that represented everything she hated about Ashford's wealth and power. Ruth caught her eye once, nodding almost imperceptibly. Everything was in place. When the dinner bell rang and guests began moving toward the dining room, Nate touched Clara's elbow. Now. They slipped through a side door into a dimly lit hallway. The servants were all focused on dinner service, and within minutes, they were outside circling the mansion toward the back gardens. The mining company offices were a 15-minute walk from Ashford's estate. They moved quickly through the snow, keeping to shadows, speaking in whispers. Guard at the front entrance, Nate observed as they approached. Ruth said there'd be a side door near the equipment shed. They found it unlocked as Ruth had promised. Inside the building was dark and silent, their footsteps echoing on wooden floors. Webb's office should be upstairs, Clara whispered. End of the hall. They climbed the stairs, carefully testing each step for creaks. The second floor was a maze of offices and storage rooms, but Webb's door was easy to identify, larger than the others, and bearing a brass nameplate. Locked. Nate produced a set of picks from his pocket. Learned this in the army. Don't ask. Clara didn't. The lock clicked open, and they slipped inside. Nate lit a small lantern while Clara began searching. Desk drawers, filing cabinets, a locked box in the corner. Here. Nate had found a false bottom in one of the desk drawers. Inside was a stack of papers tied with string. Clara's hands shook as she untied them. Contracts, just as Ruth had said. Signed agreements for special services, with dates that matched William's death, and several others documented in his journal. This is it, she breathed. This is everything. Then let's go. They were halfway down the stairs when they heard the front door open. Tell you I saw lights. Someone's in here. Clara and Nate froze. Footsteps below, multiple sets and voices she didn't recognize. Probably just Webb checking on something. You know how paranoid he is. Webb's at the party. I saw him not 10 minutes ago. Clara's blood turned to ice. Nate grabbed her hand, pulling her back up the stairs and down the hallway. At the far end was a window overlooking the equipment yard. Can you climb? He whispered. I can try. Nate opened the window, wincing at the cold air that rushed in. Below, maybe 15 feet down, was a snow-covered awning. Beyond that, the ground. Jump to the awning, slide down, run for the trees. I'll be right behind you. Clara didn't hesitate. She tucked the papers inside her coat, hiked up her skirts, and climbed onto the windowsill. Clara. She looked back. I'll find you, Nate said. Whatever happens, I'll find you. She jumped. The awning broke her fall, but not gently. Clara rolled, tumbled, hit the ground hard enough to knock the wind out of her. For a terrifying moment, she couldn't breathe. Then air rushed back into her lungs, and she was up running. The papers clutched against her chest. Behind her, she heard shouts. A gunshot cracked through the night. Clara didn't look back. She ran for the tree line, ran until her lungs burned and her legs screamed for mercy. Ran until the sounds of pursuit faded into the winter darkness. Only then did she stop gasping for breath and turn to look. Flames were rising from the mining company building. Orange light flickered against the snow. Nate. Clara's heart seized. She took a step back toward the building, then another. Clara. The voice came from the shadows to her left. She spun, hand going to the revolver at her thigh. Thomas emerged from the trees leading 2 horses. "Nate sent me ahead to wait for you, in case something went wrong." "He's still in there. I heard a gunshot." "If anyone can get out of that building, it's Nate." Thomas pressed the reins into her hands. "But you need to go. Now. Ashford's men will be coming." "I can't leave him." "You have to." Thomas's voice was fierce. "Those papers are useless if Ashford gets them back. Get to Helena. Find the marshal. That's the only thing that helps Nate now." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to run back toward the flames, wanted to do anything but abandon the man she'd come to care for so deeply. But Thomas was right, and Nate would say the same thing. She mounted the horse, the papers burning against her chest, like a promise. "Find him," she said to Thomas. "Please." "I will. Now go." Clara kicked her horse into motion, riding hard through the snow toward the eastern road, toward Helena, toward justice. Behind her, the flames rose higher, and she tried not to think about what they might be consuming. Clara rode through the night, pushing her horse as hard as she dared on the icy roads. Every mile that separated her from Silver Creek felt like a betrayal. Every moment she wasn't turning back to find Nate was agony. But she kept going. The papers inside her coat were worth more than her comfort, more than her fear. They were worth William's life. They had to be worth something. Dawn was breaking when she finally stopped to rest the horse. Her hands were numb, her face raw from the wind, and her body ached in places she didn't know could ache. But she was alive, and she had the evidence. She found shelter in an abandoned barn, feeding the horse handfuls of old hay while she tried to eat some of the dried meat Thomas had packed in the saddlebags. It tasted like sawdust, but she forced it down. The papers. She needed to look at them again, make sure they were real, make sure this nightmare was worth something. Clara spread them out on the frozen ground, her breath making small clouds as she read. Contracts for removal services. Payment records, names and dates. And there at the bottom of one page, Cornelius Ashford's signature, authorizing a payment to Marcus Webb for resolving the Whitmore situation. William's name reduced to a situation to be resolved. Clara's hands shook. Rage and grief tangled together in her chest until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. "I've got you now," she whispered to the empty barn. "I've got you." She rested for 2 hours, then pushed on. Helena was still a full day's ride, maybe more in this weather. Every hour mattered. The sun was high when she heard hoofbeats behind her. Clara's heart seized. She urged her horse faster, but the animal was exhausted, stumbling on the icy road. The hoofbeats grew closer. She reached for her revolver, turning in the saddle to face whoever was coming. 2 riders moving fast. Too far away to identify. Clara pulled her horse off the road into a stand of pines. She dismounted, steadying her weapon, waiting. The riders passed her hiding spot without slowing. Clara caught a glimpse of their faces, neither one familiar. Not Ashford's men then, just travelers. She let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. But the fear didn't leave. It stayed with her, a constant companion, as she continued toward Helena. Night fell again. Clara found another abandoned structure, this one a half-collapsed cabin that offered minimal shelter from the wind. She was too tired to care about comfort. She wrapped herself in blankets from the saddlebags and slept with her revolver in her hand. Dreams came chaotic and terrifying. Flames, gunshots, Nate's face disappearing into smoke, William's voice calling her name from somewhere she couldn't reach. She woke before dawn, gasping, tears frozen on her cheeks. "He's alive," she told herself. "He has to be alive." The third day brought Helena into view. Clara had never been so grateful to see a city in her life. Buildings, people, civilization. Safety. She went straight to the territorial marshal's office, a sturdy brick building near the center of town. Her appearance drew stares, a woman alone, travel-worn, wild-eyed with exhaustion. She ignored them all. The marshal was a big man with a thick mustache and skeptical eyes. He introduced himself as Marshal Henry Dawson and offered her a seat. "Now then, miss, what's so urgent? You rode through a blizzard to get here?" Clara placed William's journal and Ashford's papers on his desk. My name is Clara Whitmore. My brother was William Whitmore of Silver Creek. He was murdered 3 weeks ago by men working for Cornelius Ashford. I have proof. Dawson's eyebrows rose. He picked up the papers, scanning them slowly. His expression changed as he read skepticism, giving way to something harder. These are serious accusations, Miss Whitmore. They're not accusations. They're facts. Clara leaned forward. Ashford has been terrorizing Silver Creek for years. Bribery, intimidation, murder. My brother documented everything in that journal, and those contracts prove Ashford ordered his death. Dawson was quiet for a long moment reading. Finally, he looked up. If this is genuine, and I'm not saying it isn't, this is enough to arrest Ashford and half his operation. Then do it. It's not that simple. Dawson set down the papers. Ashford has connections, political friends in the territorial government. This kind of case takes time to build properly. Time? Clara's voice cracked. Marshal, there are people in Silver Creek right now who are in danger because of what I did. A man who helped me. He may already be dead. We don't have time. Dawson studied her face. Whatever he saw there seemed to convince him. Tell me everything, from the beginning. Clara talked for over an hour. She told him about William's letters about arriving in Silver Creek to find a town gripped by fear, about Nate and Thomas and Ruth, about the fire at the mining company and her desperate ride through the snow. When she finished, Dawson was already on his feet. I'm going to send telegrams to the governor and the federal marshal in Bozeman. With this evidence, we can move fast. He paused at the door. You should rest, Miss Whitmore. There's a hotel across the street. Get some sleep. I'll send word when we're ready to move. I'm going back with you. Dawson frowned. That's not advisable. If Ashford knows you're the one who took those papers, he already knows, and there are people in Silver Creek counting on me. Clara stood, her legs unsteady, but her voice firm. I didn't run away. I ran toward something, and I'm not stopping until this is finished. The marshal looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. Get some rest, he repeated. We leave at first light. Clara did sleep for the first time in days without nightmares. When she woke, it was to pounding on her hotel room door. Miss Whitmore, message from the marshal. She opened the door to find a young deputy barely old enough to shave holding out a folded paper. Ma'am, Marshal Dawson says to tell you we've got federal backing. He's assembled a posse. 20 men. We ride in an hour. Clara's heart surged. Thank you. She dressed quickly, checked her revolver, and headed for the marshal's office. The street outside was crowded with men on horseback, all armed, all wearing the grim expressions of people who knew they were riding into danger. Dawson found her in the crowd. You don't have to do this, you know. We can handle Ashford. I know. Clara mounted the horse a deputy had brought for her. But I need to see it through. For William. Dawson nodded slowly. Stay behind the main group. If shooting starts, you get to cover. Understood. Understood. The ride back to Silver Creek took 2 days with the larger group. 2 days of cold and tension and growing dread. Clara kept looking at the horizon, half expecting to see smoke, half expecting news that would shatter whatever hope she had left. But when Silver Creek finally came into view, it looked almost peaceful. Snow-covered rooftops, smoke rising from chimneys, people moving along the main street. Almost peaceful. Almost normal. Marshal Dawson called a halt outside town. We do this by the book, he announced to the assembled men. Ashford first, then Webb, and any others named in those documents. No shooting unless they shoot first. We're here to arrest, not execute. Clara barely heard him. Her eyes were scanning the crowd of townspeople who had started to gather, drawn by the unusual sight of 20 armed men approaching. She saw Ruth first, standing on the boardwalk outside the boarding house. The old woman's face was drawn and pale. Clara dismounted, pushing through the crowd. Ruth, what happened? Where's Nate? Ruth gripped her arm, steadying her. He's alive. Clara, he's alive. The relief was so intense, Clara nearly collapsed. Where? Doc Holloway's. He was shot getting out of that building, but Thomas found him, got him to safety. Ruth's eyes were wet. He's been asking for you. Wouldn't stop asking even when he was barely conscious. Clara was already moving toward the doctor's office when Marshal Dawson's voice stopped her. Miss Whitmore, we need you to identify Ashford. She turned back, torn between duty and desperate need. Go, Ruth said quietly. Finish this, then go to him. Clara nodded, falling in beside the marshal as they moved toward Ashford's mansion. The arrest was almost anticlimactic. Ashford came to the door in his dressing gown, clearly having heard the commotion. When he saw Marshal Dawson and the federal badge, his face went white. This is outrageous. I'll have your badge. Cornelius Ashford, you're under arrest for the murders of William Whitmore Henry Baker and at least 6 others. Dawson's voice was iron. We have signed contracts with your authorization. We have testimony, and we have a territorial judge waiting to hear the case. Ashford's eyes found Clara in the crowd. For a moment his mask slipped, and she saw pure hatred underneath. You, he spat. You think this changes anything? I have friends in every courthouse in the territory. I'll be out before. You'll be in federal custody within the hour, Dawson interrupted. Your friends can't help you now. Clara watched as deputies put Ashford in chains. The man who had terrorized a town, who had ordered her brother's death, who had tried to destroy everything she loved, reduced to just another criminal being led away. She expected to feel triumph. Instead, she felt hollow. Miss Whitmore. She turned. Sheriff Dugan stood nearby, his face ashen. I know I don't have any right to speak to you. I know what I did looking the other way all these years. He swallowed hard. But for what it's worth, I'm glad you did what the rest of us were too cowardly to do. Clara stared at him for a long moment. My brother is dead because you were too cowardly. Dugan flinched. I know. Then you'll understand why your regret means nothing to me. She walked away, leaving him standing in the snow. The doctor's office was a small building near the church. Clara pushed through the door without knocking. Where is he? Dr. Holloway looked up from his desk, startled. Miss Whitmore. He's in the back room, but... Clara was already past him, opening the door to the recovery room. Nate lay on a narrow bed, bandages wrapped around his shoulder and chest. His face was pale, his eyes closed. For one terrible moment, Clara thought she was too late. Then his eyes opened. Clara. Her name in his voice, rough and weak, but alive. She crossed the room in 3 steps, dropping to her knees beside the bed. You're alive. She was crying now, couldn't stop. You're alive. Told you I'd find you? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Though I'll admit the finding part was harder than expected. You were shot. Just a little. He reached for her hand with his good arm. Thomas says I'll live. Unfortunately for you. Clara laughed through her tears. Don't joke. Not about this. I'm not joking about the important part. His fingers tightened on hers. I meant what I said, Clara. That night before the social, I meant every word. I know. She brought his hand to her cheek, pressing it there. I meant it too. Then when I can stand without falling over, I have something I want to ask you. Clara's heart stuttered. Nate. Not now. He smiled weakly. I want to do it properly. On my feet. Maybe even on one knee if I can manage it. He paused. But I needed you to know, in case anything else goes wrong between now and then. Clara leaned down, pressing her forehead to his. Nothing else is going wrong. Ashford's arrested. The federal marshal has the evidence. It's over. Is it? The hard part is. She pulled back slightly, meeting his eyes. Now comes the rebuilding, and I'm not going anywhere. Promise? Promise. The door opened behind them. Dr. Holloway stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a crowd outside. The whole town, it seems. They want to speak with Miss Whitmore. Clara looked at Nate. Go, he said. They need to see you. Need to know there's hope now. I'll be back. I know. Outside, Clara found most of Silver Creek gathered in the street. Ruth was there, and Thomas and Henderson from the general store. The minister who'd been too busy for William's funeral. The undertaker who'd wanted payment first. Dozens of faces she recognized from her weeks in town. They fell silent as she emerged. Clara didn't know what to say. These people had turned their backs on her brother, had let fear rule them for years. Part of her wanted to rage at them, to demand answers for every act of cowardice. But looking at their faces, she saw something else. Shame. Relief. Hope. "Ashford's been arrested," she said finally, "along with Webb and several others. Federal charges. They won't be coming back." A murmur ran through the crowd. "My brother came here 10 years ago because he believed in this town. He believed people could build something good together even in hard country." Clara's voice strengthened. "He died trying to protect that dream. I won't let his death be meaningless." Ruth stepped forward. "What do you need from us?" Clara looked at the old woman, then at the crowd beyond. "I need you to stop being afraid. I need you to look out for each other the way William wanted. I need you to build the kind of town worth fighting for." She paused. "Can you do that?" Silence stretched. Then Henderson stepped forward. "I can. I should have spoken up years ago. I'm done being silent." One by one, others joined him. The minister, the shopkeepers, farmers and ranchers who'd lost neighbors to Ashford's greed. Each stepping forward, making a commitment. Clara felt tears threatening again, but these were different. These felt like healing. "Thank you," she managed. "All of you." The crowd began to disperse, people talking in small groups, the tension of years slowly releasing. Ruth stayed behind, approaching Clara with uncharacteristic softness. "You did it, child. You actually did it. We did it. All of us." "No." Ruth shook her head. "I've lived in this town for 40 years. Watched Ashford poison it piece by piece. Plenty of people wanted to fight. Only you actually did." She gripped Clara's hands. "William would be proud." Clara couldn't speak. She nodded, squeezing Ruth's hands back. "Now go be with your man," Ruth said, releasing her. "He's been through hell waiting for you. Don't make him wait any longer." Clara returned to the doctor's office as the sun was setting. Nate was awake, propped up on pillows, looking stronger than he had hours before. "I heard the speech," he said as she entered. Doc Holloway left the window open. Eavesdropping. Desperately. He held out his hand and she took it. "You were magnificent. I was terrified. Same thing sometimes." He pulled her closer. "Sit with me. I'm tired of looking at the ceiling." Clara sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to jostle his injured shoulder. For a while, neither spoke. They didn't need to. "What happens now?" Nate asked finally. "Now we heal, rebuild, figure out what comes next." Clara looked at him. "Together, if you still want that." "I've never wanted anything more. Even though I'm stubborn and reckless and apparently can't follow a simple escape plan." Nate laughed, then winced. "Don't make me laugh. It hurts." "Sorry." "No, you're not." "No, I'm not." They smiled at each other, and Clara felt something settle into place. Something that had been broken since William died, since her husband died, since she'd started believing she was meant to face the world alone. She wasn't alone anymore. "Stay tonight," Nate said quietly. "Not for anything improper. Just stay." Clara glanced at the door. Doc Holloway already agreed. Ruth's bringing a cot. Nate's eyes were soft. "I don't want to wake up without you." Clara thought about propriety, about what people would say, about all the rules she'd been taught since girlhood. Then she thought about how close she'd come to losing him. "I'll stay." Nate's smile was like sunrise. "Thank you." Ruth arrived an hour later with the cot blankets and a basket of food. She set everything up with brisk efficiency, ignoring Clara's attempts to help. "Eat, both of you. You look like scarecrows." She paused at the door. "I'll be by in the morning. Try not to cause any more excitement before then." After she left, Clara shared soup and bread with Nate, feeding him spoonfuls when he couldn't manage the bowl with one hand. "This is embarrassing," he muttered. "This is what people do for each other." Clara wiped his chin with a napkin. "Get used to it." "Is that an order?" "Yes." Night fell. Clara extinguished the lamp and lay down on the cot, listening to Nate's breathing steady as he fell asleep. Tomorrow would bring challenges. The trial, the rebuilding, the long process of healing a town's wounds. But tonight, in this small room, with the man she loved alive and safe beside her, Clara felt something she hadn't felt since before William's death. Peace. She closed her eyes and let it carry her into dreamless sleep. Spring came slowly to Silver Creek, the snow retreating inch by inch as the sun grew stronger. Clara stood on the porch of William's cabin, watching the creek emerge from its frozen shell water, rushing over rocks with a sound like laughter. 3 months had passed since Ashford's arrest. 3 months of healing, rebuilding, and learning what it meant to belong somewhere. Behind her, the door opened. "You're up early." Nate's voice was warm, still rough with sleep. His arm slipped around her waist, and Clara leaned back against him. "Couldn't sleep. Too much to think about." "Good thoughts or bad?" Clara considered the question. "Mostly good." "Strange, isn't it? After everything." Nate pressed a kiss to her temple. "Not strange. Earned." His shoulder had healed well, though Dr. Holloway warned he'd always carry the scar. Clara didn't mind. She had scars of her own now, invisible ones that ached when she least expected it. "The trial starts next week," she said quietly. "I know. I'll have to testify. Tell everyone what happened. Relive it." Nate's arm tightened around her. "You won't be alone. I'll be right there." Clara turned in his embrace facing him. The early morning light caught the silver at his temples, the lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled. He was beautiful to her in a way that had nothing to do with physical appearance, and everything to do with who he was. "I love you," she said. It wasn't the first time she'd said it, but each time still felt like a revelation. Nate's expression softened. "I love you too, more than I thought possible." He kissed her, then slow and tender, and Clara let herself sink into it. Let herself believe in happiness, even though part of her still waited for it to be snatched away. The sound of hoofbeats broke them apart. Thomas was riding up the path, his face unreadable. He'd been invaluable these past months, helping Clara manage both her property and the transition at Riverbend while Nate recovered. Whatever suspicions she'd harbored about his loyalty had long since dissolved. "Visitors coming," Thomas announced as he dismounted. "From Helena. Looks official." Clara and Nate exchanged glances. 20 minutes later, a buggy pulled up to the cabin carrying Marshal Dawson and a man Clara didn't recognize. They dismounted with the careful movements of people bearing significant news. "Miss Whitmore, Mr. Callahan." Dawson removed his hat. "This is Judge Harrison from the Territorial Court." Judge Harrison was a tall man with silver hair and keen eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He shook Clara's hand firmly. "Miss Whitmore, I've read the depositions. Impressive work gathering that evidence." "I had help." "Indeed." The judge glanced at Nate and Thomas. "That's actually why we're here. There's been a development in the case." Clara's stomach tightened. What kind of development? Dawson and the judge exchanged looks. Finally Dawson spoke. "Ashford's dead." The words hung in the air. Clara waited for relief, for satisfaction, for something. Instead, she felt only numbness. How? Killed himself in his cell 3 nights ago. Left a full confession. Dawson reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. Names everyone he worked with, every crime he committed. It's comprehensive. Clara took the paper but didn't open it. Why would he confess? Because he knew he was going to hang, Judge Harrison said bluntly. The evidence was overwhelming. I think he wanted to control the narrative even at the end, make himself seem like a mastermind rather than a common murderer. Does this change the trial? For the others, no. Webb and his men will still face justice. The judge paused. But Ashford's confession explicitly names your brother as one of his victims. It's official now. William Whitmore was murdered, and the man who ordered it has admitted his guilt. Clara's knees went weak. Nate caught her elbow, steadying her. "Thank you," she managed, "for coming to tell me in person. There's one more thing." Judge Harrison's expression softened slightly. "With Ashford dead and his assets seized, there's the matter of restitution. Several of his properties will be sold to compensate victims' families." He paused. "You're entitled to a significant portion, Miss Whitmore. Enough to rebuild 10 times over." Clara shook her head. "I don't want his money." "I understand the sentiment, but consider using it for the town." William's journal documented how many families Ashford hurt. This could help them recover. She hadn't thought of it that way. Money that had been used for destruction transformed into something that could heal. "I'll consider it." After the officials left, Clara sat on the porch steps, staring at Ashford's confession. Nate sat beside her close, but not touching, giving her space. "You don't have to read it," he said. "I know." Clara unfolded the paper. "But I need to." The confession was exactly as Dawson described, comprehensive, detailed, almost proud in its recounting of schemes and crimes. Ashford wrote about William's murder as a business decision, an obstacle removed. Clara read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket. "Are you all right?" Nate asked. "I thought I'd feel different. Triumphant or relieved or something." Clara looked at him. "Mostly I just feel tired." "That's grief. It doesn't follow rules." Nate took her hand. "But it does get easier, I promise." "How do you know?" "Because I've been grieving things most of my life. Lost my mother young. Lost my father to drink. Lost the life I thought I'd have." He squeezed her fingers. "But I found something else. Something better. That's how it works sometimes." Clara leaned against his shoulder. "When did you get so wise?" "About 10 minutes ago. I'm making it up as I go." She laughed, surprising herself. It felt good to laugh. Ruth arrived that afternoon, having heard the news through the town's efficient gossip network. She brought food as always, and opinions as always. "Good riddance to bad rubbish," she declared, setting a pot of stew on Clara's stove. "That man caused more suffering than anyone in this territory's history. The devil's got him now." "Ruth," Clara said mildly. "What?" "It's true." Ruth settled into a chair, accepting the coffee Thomas offered. "Now tell me about this restitution business. Henderson said there's talk of using Ashford's money to rebuild." Clara explained the judge's proposal. Ruth listened intently, her sharp eyes calculating. "That money could rebuild the Baker farm," she said slowly. "And the Miller place. Maybe even fund a proper school." "That's what I was thinking." "It won't bring anyone back, won't undo the hurt." "No, but it might help people move forward." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "Your brother would approve. He always talked about building something lasting here, a community worth fighting for." The words echoed what Clara had said to the townspeople months ago. She hadn't realized she was quoting William until this moment. "I want to do something for the families," Clara said. "All of them. A formal memorial, maybe. Something to acknowledge what was lost." "That's a fine idea." Ruth nodded approvingly. "The church has been talking about adding a memorial garden. Maybe this could help fund it." Decisions were made over the following days. Clara met with families affected by Ashford's schemes, listening to their stories, their losses, their hopes for the future. She allocated funds for rebuilding farms, settling debts, providing for widows and orphans. The money couldn't heal the wounds Ashford had inflicted, but it could remove some of the barriers to healing. Through it all, Nate was beside her, patient, supportive, occasionally pushing back when she tried to take on too much. "You can't save everyone," he said one evening as Clara pored over lists of affected families. "I can try." "You can also collapse from exhaustion." He took the papers from her hands. "When was the last time you ate a proper meal?" Clara tried to remember. "Breakfast." "It's past 9 at night." Oh. Nate pulled her to her feet. Come on, Ruth left stew. You're eating and then you're sleeping. You're very bossy when you want to be. Only with stubborn women who forget to take care of themselves. Clara let him guide her to the kitchen table, let him serve her food and watch until she ate it, let him take care of her in ways she'd forgotten to let anyone do since her husband died. It was strange learning to receive as well as give. But Nate made it easy. He didn't try to fix her or change her. He simply stood beside her and refused to let her stand alone. The memorial garden was dedicated on a warm May afternoon. Most of Silver Creek attended gathering in the small plot beside the church where names had been carved into a stone monument. William's name was there, and Henry Baker, and a dozen others whose lives had been cut short by Ashford's greed. Clara stood before the crowd, her prepared speech forgotten. Instead, she spoke from the heart. I came to Silver Creek expecting to claim property. I never expected to find a home. She looked at the faces before her. My brother believed in this town. He believed that ordinary people working together could build something extraordinary. He died for that belief. She paused, steadying herself. I used to think strength meant standing alone, facing every battle without help, without weakness, without need. Clara found Nate's eyes in the crowd. I was wrong. Real strength is knowing when to accept help. It's trusting others even when trust is terrifying. It's building something bigger than yourself. Ruth was crying. Thomas stood straight and tall, his face unreadable, but his eyes bright. Henderson, the shopkeeper, who'd been too afraid to speak, stood with his family, no longer looking away. This garden is for everyone we lost, but it's also for everyone who's still here. A reminder that we choose every day who we want to be. Clara touched the stone where William's name was carved. My brother made his choice. He chose courage over fear, community over isolation, hope over despair. I hope we can honor his memory by making the same choice. Silence fell over the crowd. Then slowly, applause began. Not triumphant or celebratory, but something deeper. An acknowledgement. A promise. Afterward, as people dispersed to share food and memories, Nate found Clara standing alone by the monument. That was beautiful, he said. I meant every word. I know you did. He took her hand. There's something I've been wanting to ask you. Been waiting for the right moment. Clara's heart stuttered. Oh, I know it's soon. I know you've been through more than anyone should have to survive. Nate faced her fully, both hands now holding hers. But I've learned not to wait for perfect moments. They don't exist. There's only now. He lowered himself to one knee. Clara's breath caught. Clara Whitmore. I fell in love with you the day I found you in that cemetery, too stubborn to let grief or cold, or a whole town's indifference stop you from honoring your brother. Nate's voice was rough with emotion. Every day since I've fallen deeper, your courage, your compassion, your absolute refusal to give up on anything or anyone. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold ring. I'm not a wealthy man. I can't promise you an easy life, but I can promise you this: you will never face anything alone again. Not as long as I'm breathing. He looked up at her, his heart in his eyes. Will you marry me? Clara was crying. She'd promised herself she wouldn't cry anymore, but here she was, tears streaming down her face in front of half the town. She didn't care. Yes. The word came out broken, beautiful. Yes, I'll marry you. Nate slid the ring onto her finger and stood pulling her into his arms. Around them, people cheered, but Clara barely heard. All she knew was Nate's arms around her, his heart beating against hers, the promise of a future neither of them had dared imagine. I love you, he murmured against her hair. I love you too. Clara pulled back enough to look at him. Though I should warn you, I'm still stubborn. I'm counting on it. He kissed her then properly in front of everyone, and Clara kissed him back without hesitation or shame. Ruth's voice cut through the celebration. About time, I've been waiting months for this. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Clara laughed too, joy bubbling up from somewhere deep inside her. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the small church overlooking the memorial garden. Clara wore a dress of ivory silk that Ruth had insisted on providing. Nate wore his best suit and a smile that didn't fade all day. Thomas stood as witness. Ruth sat in the front row dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Dr. Holloway, Sheriff Dugan's replacement, attended with his wife. Even Henderson came looking uncomfortable in formal clothes, but genuinely happy. The minister spoke of love and commitment, of building a life together in harsh country. But Clara barely heard him. She was looking at Nate, remembering every moment that had led them here. The cemetery, the first kindness, the growing trust, the terror of almost losing him, the joy of finding their way back. "I do," she said when prompted, and meant it with everything she was. "I do," Nate echoed, and his voice held the same conviction. They kissed as husband and wife, and the small church erupted in applause. At the reception in Ruth's boarding house, Clara found a quiet moment alone with Thomas. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. I couldn't have survived this without you." Thomas inclined his head. "Your brother saved my life once. Seemed only right to return the favor to his sister. It was more than that. You risked everything to tell the truth. The truth matters." Thomas glanced at Nate, who was deep in conversation with Henderson. "Your husband is a good man. He'll take care of you. We'll take care of each other." Thomas smiled a rare expression that transformed his weathered face. "That's even better." The celebration continued late into the evening. Clara danced with Nate, with Thomas, even with Henderson, who stepped on her toes twice and apologized profusely each time. As the night wound down and guests began departing, Clara and Nate slipped outside to escape the noise. They stood on Ruth's porch looking up at a sky brilliant with stars. "Mrs. Callahan," Nate said, testing the name. Clara smiled. "Mr. Callahan. Has a nice ring to it." "It does." She leaned against him. "What happens now?" "Now we go home. Our home." Nate's arm tightened around her. "We combine the properties like we discussed. Build something neither of us could build alone." "That sounds like a lot of work." "It does." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "But I've got a stubborn wife to help me. Heard she doesn't give up on anything." Clara laughed softly. "You've got me there." They stayed on the porch until the last guest left, then rode home together through the moonlit night. Home to the cabin that had been Williams', that was now theirs, the first building in what would become a ranch spanning both properties. Inside, with the door closed against the cool spring night, Nate took Clara's hands. "I need you to know something." Clara waited. "When I was lying in Doc Holloway's shot and barely conscious, I kept thinking about what I'd do if I lost you. If you'd been caught, if Ashford had—" He shook his head. "I've been alone most of my life. Thought I preferred it that way. But those hours not knowing if you were safe, I realized something." "What?" "I'm not afraid of dying. Never have been." Nate met her eyes. "But I'm terrified of living without you. That's new. That's something I never expected to feel." Clara raised a hand to his face, tracing the lines she'd come to know so well. "You won't have to. I'm here. I'm staying. Promise?" "I promise." She rose on her toes and kissed him softly. "Now stop being morbid on our wedding night." Nate laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Yes, ma'am." Months passed, then years. Clara and Nate built their ranch into one of the most successful in the territory. They raised horses, cattle, and eventually 3 children who grew up wild and free on Montana land. Thomas stayed, becoming not just their foreman, but their family. Ruth lived to see Clara's first child born, passing peacefully 2 years later, with Clara holding her hand. The town of Silver Creek grew and prospered. The memorial garden expanded, becoming a place where people gathered not just to mourn, but to celebrate. Each spring, on the anniversary of its dedication, townsfolk laid flowers and remembered those who had been lost. Clara never forgot William. His journal remained in a place of honor in her home, a reminder of the brother who had believed in something enough to die for it. She told her children stories about him, made sure they knew the uncle they would never meet. And on quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the ranch was peaceful, Clara would sit on the porch with Nate watching the stars, grateful for every moment they had. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" she asked one such evening, years into their marriage. Sometimes. Nate's hand found hers in the darkness. "If I hadn't been riding by that cemetery, if Ashford had gotten to you first, if 100 small things had gone differently. Does it scare you?" "No." He turned to look at her. "Because this is what happened. We found each other. We built this life. Nothing can change that now." Clara leaned into him, feeling his warmth, his steadiness, his love. "I used to think I was meant to be alone," she said softly. "That strength meant never needing anyone. And now I know that was just fear talking." Clara smiled. Real strength is letting someone in, trusting enough to be vulnerable, building something together that neither person could build alone. Nate kissed her temple. "Wise woman." "I learned from experience." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. An owl called in the distance. One of the horses nickered softly. "Clara, I love you. Still. Always." She smiled, feeling the truth of it down to her bones. "I love you too. Still. Always." The woman who had arrived in Silver Creek as a grieving stranger, who had buried her brother alone in a blizzard, who had faced murderers and corruption and a town's worth of fear, had found what she never expected to find. Home. Family. Love. Not because she was rescued, but because she had fought for it. Not because someone saved her, but because she had learned that accepting help wasn't weakness. Clara Whitmore Callahan had come to Montana to claim her brother's land. She had stayed because she found something infinitely more valuable. She had found herself, and in doing so, she had found everything that mattered.